Well, beloved, today we continue with the readings that we had last week. This back and forth between Jesus and the Pharisees, where he's saying, "You have heard it said to you." And whenever he uses that language, he's talking about a saying that the Pharisees have about their interpretation of the Bible. The things that he's putting forth are not necessarily in the Bible. They're interpretations of the religious authorities of the time. And he says, "You have heard it said to you, love your friends and hate your enemies. But I say to you, love your enemies and hate those who persecute you." The great 20th century Christian writer G.K. Chesterton had a quote on this. He says, "The Bible tells us to love our neighbors and also to love our enemies, probably because they're generally the same people." And this got me to thinking about the last time we'd gone through this set of readings, which was, of course, 3 years ago, which was in 2011. Anybody remember 2011? It's a great year. I mean, at least it started off well, you know. It started off really well. Though he's persona non grata these days. But anyhow, it felt right back then. And then, shortly after that, we had this. You know, the largest protest that they'd seen in Madison since the Vietnam War. A time of intense soul-searching and a time of intense acrimony here in Wisconsin. A colleague of mine talked about an encounter that he had just shortly after this whole thing started, after the Acts 10 was being pushed through and the protests started. He said he went into a diner, and in that diner, it was a place that everybody met on a regular basis, people who were retired and would get together for coffee, 3 or 4 days a week. And there were two people there that were longtime friends, that had their kids grown up together, they had grandparented together. They talked about where they were going, what they were working on, and where they were going for vacation. This had been a long period of friendship for these two people. And then he said he walked into the middle of this. One person said, "I'll be praying for our governor, that he'll remain strong during this difficult time. I don't want him to bend to special interest groups and decide it's time public employees stop getting a free ride at the expense of us taxpayers." And then, "Well, there's one thing for sure. As long as this man remains the governor of Wisconsin because he's your governor and not mine, there will be no consideration of the middle class and the poor. We will simply be in a state chained to the interests of big business." And then, "Well, I'd rather be chained to big business than crushed under the heel of big government, which is exactly what your president has been attempting to do to the American spirit for the past 2 years." He was absolutely amazed. These two people that were friendly just a few weeks before had literally become cartoons. They'd become caricatures of the people that they had been before. They were repeaters of party lines. You could have simply taken them and put them on Fox News or MSNBC, and it would have looked like any debate on either of those channels. They had lost all personal connection to each other. Jesus spent some time in our reading today talking about how it is that we're supposed to deal with conflict. How do we deal with conflict? And the concept he's fighting against is something that's called lex talionis in Latin. It means literally the eye for the eye, the tooth for the tooth. And what we have to remember is that at that time, actually, that was a step up. In most of the ancient Near East at the time, if somebody wronged you, it was usual and customary to take back 3 or 5-fold retribution. So if somebody kills somebody in your family, you kill 3 to 5 in their family. And then the cycle of violence continues on and on. This idea that the Pharisees are teaching is an improvement over that an eye for an eye, let the punishment fit the crime exactly. Eye for an eye, a tooth for the tooth. So that's an improvement. But Jesus says we have to do better than that. It can't just be that. So that's where we get to all this language about slapping. Excuse me on that. Every time I read this thing about slapping on the cheek, I think of the fish slapping dance from Monty Python. So Jesus is speaking, as he has been in the previous passage from last week, he's speaking in hyperbole. He's not actually setting up, well, this is exactly how you're supposed to live your life. He's using emphasis, and he's overemphasizing things in order to make his point. But you have to think about what's the context. He says, if somebody strikes you on the right cheek, then present to them the left. What's he talking about here? Well, at that time, everybody was right-handed. Even if you were left-handed, you were trained to be right-handed, because left-handed people were considered to be evil at the time. So you were trained to be a right-hander. Everybody was a right-hander. So striking on the right cheek, if somebody hits you on the right cheek, it's not going to be a left-hand strike. It's going to be with the right. It's going to be with the back of your hand. So by its nature, a strike on the right cheek is a backhanded slap. It's the kind of slap you give to an inferior, somebody who is beneath you, somebody who is beneath your notice. Jesus says you turn the left cheek to them, which they can't hit you backhand with. They have to slap you as if you're an equal. What Jesus is saying is, make it so that they have to acknowledge your equality to them. Make it so that you have to have your humanity shown to them. Which is what he's talking about with this other stuff that he's talking about today as well. This next thing about if somebody sues you for the shirt off your back. They had that expression back then too. Except that back then that was called a chiton. And if somebody sues you for your chiton, your garment, then you give them your hymation as well. The hymation is a cloak or an outer garment. The idea being, well, maybe if I take their chiton, they'll still have the hymation over them and nobody will know what I've actually done to them. But if you give them the outer cloak, you're naked. And that shames the person who has insisted on taking your clothes from them. So this isn't kind of passive resistance. This is getting in the person's face and insisting that they accept you as a human being. Likewise, making somebody carry a pack for a mile. Any Roman soldier of any rank could have any non-citizen of the Roman Empire carry their pack for 1 mile. And 95% of the Jewish nation were not Roman citizens. You only made like the upper ruling elite of the people you conquered, the citizens, so they'd have a buy-in. So they could make you carry it for a mile, but no longer than a mile. If they have to carry it more than a mile, then they're in violation of their code of military discipline, and they can get in trouble for that. So what Jesus is saying is, don't just carry it for a mile, carry it for 2. And that soldier is going to start sweating as you carry it over a mile and starting to worry about whether he's going to get in trouble over this. And he'll have to start confronting you as a human being rather than just a pack animal. So that's what this is all about. That's what non-resistance is about. This is what nonviolent resistance is about. Martin Luther King wrote that the point was to force the other to see you as a human. It's supposed to be directed against the perceived evil, not against the perpetrator, and it should be willing to accept some amount of suffering for getting rid of our need for retribution. It's not about retribution. It's about making the other see your humanity. The writer Parker Palmer talks about our civil society and our need to see each other's humanity. He uses the word civility. When he talks about civility, he's not talking about just being nice to each other. We quite often think that that's the point of civil government or the point of Christianity. Being nice has really nothing to do with it. In fact, being nice can actually stop civility because it stops a voice that needs to be heard. Instead, what Palmer says is that we need, in order to hold a society together, the politics of the broken-hearted. And what he means by that is that in a society with people with different viewpoints, nobody gets what they want. Nobody gets everything that they want. Nobody gets to see society turn into the society that they would prefer to have. You have to live in broken-heartedness, in the fact that it will never be completely perfect. It's this tension between different views and feelings that we find our real strength as humans, that we as a species can confront the things that confront us. And Palmer draws this deeply from his Christian faith. He says, in the Christian tradition, the broken, open heart is virtually indistinguishable from the image of the cross, because it's on the cross that God's heart was broken for the sake of humanity, broken open in a love that Christ's followers are called to emulate. Even as a physical form, the cross, with arms that stretch left and right and up and down, symbolizes the tension, the excruciating tension that can open the heart to love. The greatest leaders of our nation have been people who have been able to love in a broken-hearted way. We think about one of our undoubtedly greatest ones, Abraham Lincoln. This is in January 1838. This is 23 years before the Civil War. Lincoln addressed a young men's society in Springfield, and he talks about the danger to society. He says, "At what point shall we expect the approach of danger? Do we expect some transatlantic military giant to step over the ocean and crush us at a blow? Never. All the armies of Europe, Asia, and Africa combined could not by force take a drink from the Ohio or make a track on the Blue Ridge in the trial of 1,000 years. At what point is the approach of danger to be expected? I answer, if it ever reach us, it must spring up among us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, then we ourselves must be its author and finisher." That same Lincoln, of course, grows up to a very difficult time in American history. If we go to his second inaugural address, which I think actually is one of the greatest sermons ever written, this is in the middle of the Civil War, where thousands of people are literally dying on every side all the time. And he issues those words that are so amazing, with malice towards none and charity for all. Even as Americans are struggling with each other bodily and for the nation's soul, malice towards none and charity for all. That broken-heartedness is a basis of godly government. And by that I mean a government that works for unity rather than for disunity. It's the basis of all good government. It's government that works. And it's becoming increasingly difficult in our modern situation. There was an article in the journal just a week or so ago talking about the retirements from our state legislatures on both sides, on both the Republican and the Democrat side. The thing that's notable about this is these are the moderates. These are the people that for a generation have been able to talk to each other, to get things done, to make a difference in how the legislature runs. Most of them are not really speaking out, except for Dale Schultz, who is the Republican senator from Richland Center, and also an Episcopalian. And he says, the reason he's getting out is because it's come to the point where there's a party litmus test, and the Republicans don't have a monopoly on this. The Democrats are applying the same thing. But the idea that if you don't hold purely to the party line, that you're no longer electable. That ability to reach over the aisle is not something that's being valued by the forces that are working in our politics. One of the things that I thought was most telling was when he was talking about, they had him on Wisconsin Public Radio, and he was talking about Acts 10. He was the only Republican that voted against the Acts 10 legislation. And the interviewer said, "Well, why did you do that? Obviously it was political suicide for you, and you knew it at the time." And he said, "Well, it wasn't because I disagreed with it. He said, it's because I could tell that if it went through, Wisconsin would be divided for a generation." And unfortunately, that seems to have come to fruition. Civility is what we need in order to keep our society together. Parker Palmer says again, if American democracy fails, it will happen because we, you and I, become so fearful of each other, of our differences and of the future, that we unravel the civic community on which democracy depends, losing our power to resist all that threatens it and to call it back to its highest form. Jesus said, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same?" As a pastor, I'm actually not looking forward to whichever next election we have, because right now we have this perfect trifecta of prayer. Every time we pray the prayers of the people, we mention Barack Obama and Governor Walker and Mayor Screamer, and between that, there's got to be somebody that gets your goat. We are forced every week when we do the prayers of the people to pray for somebody we disagree with somebody we might even consider our enemy. Whenever we say, he's not my president, or not my governor, or not my mayor, we opt ourselves out of society. We don't change them, we change ourselves by stating that we're no longer part of the fabric of our society. And we give in to the forces of evil that benefit much more from our division than from any particular policy choice that's made by any leader in our governments. When we speak like that, when we lose civility, we become caricatures of humanity, of the people that we're meant to be. We change from being neighbors to being enemies, and we move in a direction away from the gospel. We have to recover tolerance. Now, tolerance is a word that's bandied around. I mean, I have it on a bumper sticker on the back of my car. That doesn't mean much, just to put a bumper sticker on your car. What do I mean by that? It's not giving up our differences, because the differences are what make us stronger as a nation, a society, and as a species. It's about learning to compromise and accept tension between differing viewpoints. And it's not about being nice. It's about having respect for others and for ourselves. It's not about keeping silent or avoiding argument. It's about, even in the middle of a passionate argument, of refusing to demonize or dehumanize the other. And it's not an easy thing to do. We can't just sing a few verses of Kumbaya and feel better about each other. It's really hard to live in the tension of the broken-hearted. It's an everyday, every hour challenge. If we're to follow this person that we call Lord, whose heart was broken open for us on the cross, we have to learn tolerance and forbearance. And if we as Christians are to set an example for fellow Americans, then we have to be concerned about the business of civility, because it's a gospel value. We are called to do the hard work of praying for and working with our enemies, with malice towards none, and charity for all. Amen.